an old engineer, old broken down engineer, and I've been collecting junk my whole life, and so it all ended up here, and we call it the Canadian Museum of Making.
Tell me where you want me to stop and what you want me to talk about.
Okay.
So this room is part of the African metalwork collection that I have, and I'm interested in how things are made from metal.
People learned how to smelt iron, which is a really difficult thing to learn how to do, but they figured out how to do it first in Africa. And then that technology, as man sort of moved out of Africa, it went to the rest of the world.
Well, I'm interested in African stuff. You know, I started because I really liked the shapes. And so the forged metal, I really just liked the look of the things, and I thought they were really cool, things that resonated with me. When I started, it was kind of the early days of the AIDS epidemic, and that was really having a really tremendously negative effect on Africa. And what was happening is people were having to sell things that were important, religious or ceremonial objects, and they were selling them one at a time. And I felt if somebody didn't step in and sort of become the custodian for that, all of those things would be, one person would have one thing and one person would have something else, and the connection of the family of them would be lost. And so I wanted to sort of get in the middle of that and say, if we see something that's really important and belongs together, then we'll try and keep them together as a family, or we'll try and build a collection as these things are sold, that they don't get sort of cast to the winds so they can't be reassembled again.
Did the people making these instruments have a spiritual connection to the
Yeah, absolutely,
the process? And I mean, if you
Yeah.
mention that they're becoming, from a tool to a place of ritual, there must be some sort of strong emotional connection to
Really
what that's
the
given.
blacksmith in the community, or the person who smelts the iron and looks after the iron, is like a priest. And so that whole process is seen to be sort of taking something from the earth and converting it into this useful tool and then putting it back in the right way. Like something like this is like a hoe. And so, they make that hoe, and then it'll eventually wear down and not become a useful object anymore. And after they finish with it, so this is one that's in pretty good shape, but as they use it, it'll wear till there's only that much of it left. And then what'll happen is he'll give it back to the blacksmith, and he'll make this out of it. And so that, if you didn't do it in that way, like what they feel, the person who uses that object, they feel that he stores the energy of the work is stored in the object. And so at the end of it, the object is dangerous if you don't handle it in the right way, because it has so much energy associated with it. So it's made in 1895, and it was made by a company in England called Stott, and it's an engine out of a mill. So these were they're called horizontal mill engines, and this is a tandem one, so there's two cylinders that work together. It's about 100 horsepower, so it's not very big, and it runs at about 90 RPM, and it ran from 1895 up until just about 1960, and it's got all kinds of things that are just done for purely appearance sake. They're not done for any functional reason. And so it was really attractive to me because it's kind of like this highly evolved thing that really works well, but it also looks good. And a lot of it was made to look good. It was owned by the great-grandson of the guy. Still ran this business. It was not, they weren't making fabric there anymore, but he was subcontracting the manufacture of this special kind of material that they made there. And so the engine was in a room, and they sort of carefully locked up the room. And it was really important to them because it was a giant purchase at the time when they bought it, and they didn't want it to get into hands that would, like there's a lot of brass things on it, and you could probably sell the brass things for more than I paid for the engine. But they didn't want that to happen to it. So I had to go meet the guy, and he kind of interviewed me to decide if I was going to be an acceptable owner or not. I guess I passed the test. So we bought it and brought it here.
Would you turn the engine on for us? Would that be possible?
Sure,
or?
let me give it a try. Okay, you ready?
I have this belief that the only functional objects that survive are things that people took a lot of care into making. And so this was really a carefully made thing, and it was made to look a certain way, and people cared about how it looked. And if you do that, it has no functional reason anymore. The only reason it's here is because it looks good.
Oh, the ropes have fallen off there. It's like me, they're getting old.
So what did you start collecting with? Or have you just always been a collector since you were very young?
Always doing something like that, yeah. Me and my mom and dad were interested in old stuff, and so they, you know, if we went on holidays, we'd go to an antique shop, or we'd always be going to places like that. And then I, you know, as I did stuff in my life, if I saw something I liked the look of and I could afford it, then I'd get it.
So would you say, I mean, to what extent did your parents play a role in, you know, how you developed? I mean, nature versus nurture. Is it
enormous? Yeah. I mean, they bought me this car, a car like this one, not this one, when I was 12 years old. And the deal was they didn't want me riding on motorcycles, and so they said, we'll buy a car for you, you can take it apart and fix it up, and then when you're 16 you can drive it. If you forget, you got to promise not to drive on motorcycles. And so they bought me a car that was exactly like that one. I took apart the whole car and took it down our basement because we didn't have a heated garage, and fixed each piece and then took it back out to the garage and put it together. And so people were telling me from the time I was 12 years old, you'll never get that back together. And they might tell my mother that. My grandfather was telling my mother, you'll never get that back together. And so, you know, I got it back together and drove it for 2 or 3 years. And then I sold it when I went to university because we didn't have any money. So it was really, my parents had confidence that I could do things like that. And that was the first big project that I worked on, that was mine, that I owned, that I, you know, they helped me all the way through. But they always made it so that a kid could succeed to the next step. You know, I've done things like that my whole life. It's like people say you can't do it. It's like just annoying. It means they can't do it. It has nothing to do with what you can do.
Why did you build your museum underground like this?
I did it underground because I've been to lots of places where people collected stuff over their life, and then at the end their kids aren't interested or somebody's not interested, so they sell all the stuff off. And when you go to those sales, it just makes you sick because there's so much energy that's been put into the assembly of this stuff, and then at the end it's kind of like, you know, someone didn't get it, so they sold it all off. And then probably they get it when, like, you might not get that when you're 20, you might really get it when you're 50. And so if you're the custodian of it when you're 20, you might sell it and not realize what you're selling. You might not realize the personality that was left behind with it. And so I tried to build this in a way where you can't get a lot of the stuff out. And so if you want to sell it, you know, you're never getting that engine out of there. And also, the other thing that was operative here was it's a really beautiful spot. And there are enough buildings here. And so I was trying to get things that didn't disrupt the look of the place, you know, and I'd already built too many buildings. So I got sick of having buildings that you could see and wanted to get this all down below ground.
So the only other thing I was wondering if you could tell us what this is.
That's a mural of different things I've done in my life. I've never worked for anyone else in my life, so I've always worked for myself. And when I was going to grad school, some guys came to university, and so they asked us to make a machine, and I quit university and started making. One of the things I try and do in my life is convince other engineers that if you want your stuff to survive, if you're trying to leave some kind of, I think we're all trying to leave some kind of mark someplace in the world after we're gone. And if you want to leave your mark by the things you made, you better care how they look, because their function will be obsolete after, you know, soon after you're gone. They won't be here anymore. The gear there is a machine I built up in the Arctic that, you know, you're trying to leave a record of what was important to you, probably not important to anybody else, but important to you.
I think that's something about your museum that fascinates me, is that it's not just a museum, it's your heart and your soul, or at least elements of your life.
Yeah, museums to me are most often they're collections of things done by committee, and so usually those things are mildly or exceptionally disturbing when you walk through them. You know, the people who do this are quirky. They're always, because they're weird, right? It's like, and so that weirdness is lost over, it just gets watered down and eroded, and people don't appreciate the weirdness of it. But really the weirdness to me is the thing. It's not like the collection is, you know, I mean, it's interesting, but it's like a little peephole into the really interesting part, which is who did that. We think we live in 3 dimensions, but we really live in 4. And we often forget about the time dimension as we're doing things. And so if you keep the time dimension in your mind and you say, I'm gonna be like this place for me, I'm hanging around here for the rest of my life. And I wanna do things that make it so that other people have the pleasure and the joy out of it that I had. Well, if I develop something quickly, I'll make a lot of mistakes because it's inevitable. These are really complicated, subjective problems, and if you try and solve them quickly, you'll make a lot of mistakes. So you have to plan to make mistakes. You have to work as hard as you can at each step. But if you do it in an iterative way, then you end up with things that are really beautiful and really well thought out and really a pleasure to be around. Okay, so coffee cup okay?
That's fine. That's totally fine.